Welcome. This is a re-recording of the Trade.io user group earlier today. Um, let's jump in. Uh, my name is Anthony Tamalonis. Quick about me. I have degrees in math and physics. I was an engineer at a small company for 6 years. Since it was a small company, I wore a lot of hats relevant to this conversation. I programmed in LabVIEW, which is a graphical programming language where you draw wires between blocks of code. So when I saw Tray for the first time, it just immediately made perfect sense. I also did 3D modeling, product assembly, customer support, R&D. Then I was a project manager at United Airlines working on the homepage before the pandemic. And now I've been a project manager at the American Medical Association for over 3 years. In this talk, I'm going to tell you about how we got started using Tray at the AMA and how I think about when to use Tray. So our first kind of use case that really kicked all this off, my boss actually put in place before I joined, calling it from email to automation. So um, our department at the AMA is member and marketing and member experience. We handle all the digital publishing, our website, online products, news, social media, email marketing, paper mailing campaigns, et cetera. And it's the rest of our organization that has expertise in medicine and really helps us be physicians' powerful ally in patient care and to promote the art and science of medicine. So what that means for the purposes of this talk is that all these different departments that know medicine really well, so the advocacy, health science and ethics, health outcomes, medical education, practice sustainability, and many more, they come to our division to get their message out there, reach our members, and tell the world kind of what we're doing, and that means a lot of intake. And there's some problems when you use email and in person. They're just chaotic for intake. So, um, you know, someone emails one person, they should have emailed four. They tell one team, but not another. When you get that request coming in, you're asking the same questions every single time. When is this due? I need a different file format. Do you have an embargo on this work? There's no trackability for the work, so it's really hard to tell where the work's coming from, who's asking the most, what are the trends and themes in the work that's coming in, and you have low accountability. So, if someone walks by your desk and asks you for something, it's really easy to say yes and then just get distracted naturally and forget, quite honestly. And then a month later, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Sorry. And so these are all the problems that we faced. So the solution, somewhat obviously, is Tray. That's why we're here. But beyond that, we kind of wrapped around Tray, which was the brains of this solution, JotForm as an intake, and then Asana for where work got done. And Tray helped to route information from JotForm to Asana. And this was all before Asana had forms, before Tray had forms. So that's really why we needed JotForm. There's still some benefits to using JotForm, even though Tray and Asana have forms these days. So essentially, this is an intake where you tell us about your request. And there's categories you can narrow down on whether you want a new web page, marketing, you want analytics on something that you've done. It's not so much a menu as it is kind of what are you looking for, and then there'll be a bunch of follow-up questions that the teams have helped craft so that we get the most relevant information that we need to process your request up front, and then the team can really dive into that. And then Tray takes that information from the form and uses logic to create tasks and projects in Asana, sometimes duplicating work across multiple teams so that teams can collaborate. It makes it really easy to move work between teams if something comes in the wrong way. Someone said they wanted a new web page, but really they want to do an email campaign. And it's also really easy for teams to see what each other are doing. And then say, oh, I'd like to include that in my newsletter. I didn't even know that was happening. So it really gives us that visibility of all the work that's coming in. So just a quick overview of this workflow, what it looks like in Tray. It really does, this obviously is a joke, but it feels like this. It is a giant monolithic workflow. There's one callable snuck in the middle of this. The main logic is just a giant branching circuit that extends far off to the left and a little bit off to the right of this screenshot. up above, there's a bunch of data processing and kind of setup, and then down below, there's a bunch of cleanup. Think, sending an email confirmation back to the requester with a link to their tasks that were created, so they can follow up and track their own work, adding certain people to certain tasks, etc. It being so old, it's not necessarily worth refactoring. And it's not necessarily bad how this was built, or has become to be, and it works quite well. I came up with this while making this presentation. If the only tool you have is Tray, it's tempting to automate everything. And then there's certainly times that's a mindset I'm in, where everything that I hear is how can I do that in Tray? So I want to talk a little bit about when I use Tray. The first time that I look for Tray is when I want to save time. This comes in the form of someone saying, it takes me a few days to do this task every month. I had a coworker literally tell me they spent 2 days a month importing data from Sprinklr, a social media management platform, into Asana. And I heard that and said, let me see that data. Let's talk about this process that you're doing. We looked at it. It was very well structured. And we looked at Sprinklr, and I was able to set up an email trigger that every night Sprinklr sends an email to Tray with the last day's changes. And then Tray processes that and either creates new tasks in Asana or updates existing tasks in Asana. So I went from this person spending 2 days a month to spending 0 days a month. And now I'm going from monthly data to nightly data for the teams to look at. So huge improvements there. The next area I look at is to solve problems. Often this is when I think or someone else says, I wish I could. And that might be a feature, again, with Asana that maybe doesn't exist, but you wish you could do that thing. And I find these often aren't worth the time to work on, but it can be fun to explore. Sometimes you'll find a gem where actually that thing is worth building in Tray. Have a webhook out of Asana into Tray and then back into Asana, for example, or out to another service. And it's also really fun, I think, to explore these briefly when they come up. So you can just look at the API and think about how you would build something and just kind of expand your knowledge of Tray and the third-party APIs that you work with. And the other solving problems that I'm going to talk about next is how can I build an MVP of a product with Tray? So the problem that came up, we wanted to build a listen to this article feature. You might see these all over the web, especially on news content, where there's a little button, you can hear an article read, often by a robotic voice, instead of having to read it. So what this looked like after we built it, here's an example article from January. There's a link. If you go to bit.ly/tray-ama, you can just visit this article if you want to read it or just check out the audio player. So this kind of came about from our VP's big idea list. And I was asked to investigate if this was feasible and how we might go about doing it. And a few caveats about us. We're a little resource constrained, so I couldn't just hand this to a developer and say, please build this. Really just didn't. We don't have the bandwidth to do that, and we have a lot of other developer projects that we really need those that team working on. And we're also pretty slow to onboard new vendors. So in my research, I found that there are a lot of startups that do text-to-speech, but it sometimes can take us 3 or 4 weeks to get a new vendor approval through legal and finance. And we were looking for just a quicker turnaround just to see, is this viable? Is this feasible? Will people click on it and listen to it? And we wanted a kind of faster turnaround time. So what I found was, all these startups actually use one of the 4 cloud providers, Amazon, IBM, Google, or Microsoft, sorry. Those 4 clouds providers have an API for text-to-speech. They really don't have user interfaces for them, which is why these startups have kind of popped up around that space. And my colleague actually already had a Google Cloud auth set up in Tray, and Google Cloud offers, I think, 4 million characters translated to speech per month for free. So essentially, this was a no-cost solution. of course, minus my time. But it was really easy to spin up because of all those factors. Um, and so I set up a Jotform trigger. So it's really simple form, name, sorry, title of your request or your article, email address, and then the body of content that you wanted to convert to speech. And then I used some custom HTTP calls to Google and Simplecast. And we had just, at the same time, we could just put a Simplecast podcast player on our website. And so I decided to piggyback off of that, where I would upload these audio files into Simplecast as kind of a hidden podcast, and then easily drop them onto the site in a way that looked somewhat visually polished and matched the style of our site. So just a little overview of this workflow. I've kind of laid it out here. There's a Jotform trigger that comes in, some basic formatting of the data, then a little authentication, where then I have some data initialization, then the core workflow loop that does the bread and butter of this workflow that I'll show next. Then if I have time, a little snippet of, I can't believe this works, but if it didn't, this whole thing wouldn't be possible. And then the last step is I send an email back to the person who submitted with an audio file. I said I integrated Simplecast. Actually didn't have access to that API at first. And so I built it with email, and I just never got back around to integrating directly with Simplecast. But this has been working for a while, and it doesn't take too much time from the team. Actually, the last piece down here is the extra code I wanted to show. This is a snippet that I've saved in my Tray instance. I use it all the time. I call it always true. It's a great place to store extra connectors that I'm not using. So it's a Boolean where empty string equals empty string. So it's always going to execute the true branch. I can put stuff in the false branch that'll just never run. So in this case, I'm calling custom HTTP calls to Google Cloud. And there's some other endpoints that I was looking at, and I didn't want to delete them, but I don't need them in the main workflow. So I held them back here. It's also a really great tool for debugging something or refactoring. If you have a step that you think you can delete, rather than just deleting it, it often will put it in one of these always true in the false branch, so it doesn't run. And that way, if I missed something and my workflow errors and there was a reference back to this step that I needed, I still have it, and I can see what the data in this step, what would have been, what it's referencing, and then I can fix that mistake. And then when I feel comfortable that I've finished the refactor, then I can delete these blocks and move on. It's also how I made this little overview here on the right-hand side. I just made some always trues, gave them fun names, and dropped parts of my code in. So I had this nice little vertical for this presentation. I don't usually do that when I'm just coding in Tray or building in Tray. So the core workflow, I didn't know the best way to present it here in a PowerPoint. But first I wanted to highlight the just power of the HTTP connector in Tray. So there is a Google Cloud connector. I'm sure it's pretty popular, and there's a lot of services in that connector, but there's not one for text to speech. I'm sure text to speech is a very, very underutilized API endpoint for Google Cloud, but because of this connector, I was able to make my own calls right to it, and again use that existing auth that I had in the calls. So my keys are safe and well handled, but I'm also able to just make my own custom calls. Then the next thing I wanted to highlight is a kind of quick tip on data manipulation. So the beginning and the end, the very end of this loop just checks if there's more text, and if there's not, it exits out. And I should mention the important part of this API call is you're limited to 5,000 characters per call. So if you have a longer block of text, you have to break it apart into chunks and then parse each chunk through the API and then recombine them. So first, I just start with a get text, which is that whole block of text that I want to get, and I pull out just 5,000 characters. And then at the end, I set the remaining text back into that data store and then get it at the start of the loop. That's a pretty standard pattern in Tray to have, a get data at the beginning, a set at the end to pass data between iterations of your loop. I do that here as well in the middle. The data that comes out of the API is a base64 encoded string. it's a lot bigger than the string that went in. So it gets big quickly and gets bigger than a data store can handle. So actually, um, I found I was able to just concat uh, uh, these strings together to create a valid audio file. So I concat them here. Um, I save it to a file, and then I save a reference. I save the file reference in my data store so that the next iteration of the loop, I can get that file reference back. Then I can read the file with a little extra parameter for the first time in the loop when there is no file. Um, and then I can concat them. So this is just a clever trick to save larger data sets that don't fit inside data stores. Here I had just a flat file data, so a file helper worked really well. If you have more structured data, you can use CSV to store more structured data as well. And last bit is that the weight that works. So I have this base64 encoded string that gets returned from the Google Cloud API. I need to convert that to an MP3. I was not sure how to do this. I played around in Tray and I figured out, or I found that if I use create file from content, if I pass in that string, if I give the file a .mp3 extension, and if I say convert base64 to binary is true, what I get out is a working MP3 file that you can play in any audio player. Uh, I don't know how that works. I'm lucky that it works. If that didn't work, I would have tried probably to go into the scripts connector and maybe find some Python that did my file conversion, or maybe found a third-party service that I could call. But I don't know that it would have worked, and I might have been dead in the water from the beginning. But luckily, this did work. So just a weird tip if you're ever in that same boat.
If you've made it this far, thank you for watching. If you have a question, leave a comment below and I'll get back to you. I'd appreciate a like if you found this video interesting. And if I've earned it, and if you want to see more Tray.io automation content, please subscribe. Thank you.